Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Homesteading Academy, where homesteaders come to learn. If this is your first time here, we kind of do things a little differently. I don't necessarily have any moderators in the chat because we want it to be an educational series. So I want to say hello to everybody in the chat who's come. We really appreciate you being here. And what I want to do is introduce our guest. But before we get to that, this is a live format. And I wanted to let you know that if you could please hold your questions until the end. It's usually about an hour-long presentation or less. And Sandi, I'm sure, will be glad to answer all your questions. It just makes it easier for us to get through all of the material and then be able to answer your questions and spend time doing that. So I want to introduce you to Sandi from Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming, Arizona. She splits her time between Wyoming and Arizona, as you know, as many of you know, because you're familiar with her channel. But she also is a master gardener. She has other channels as well, which I do want to mention, and that is the Fused Glass Artwork, because she is an artist. She is involved in numerous different types of artwork, from crocheting to fused glass and so on. And she also has a channel for those who are interested in faith-based content, which is One Woman's Walk with God. So hello to everybody, and let's bring up Sandi. Welcome in,
Hello.
Sandi.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I so appreciate you letting me be on your Homesteading Academy. I'm totally excited. And everybody, hello. Thanks for coming in.
We're thrilled to have you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to come on and talk to us about Gardening 365.
Yeah, it's interesting when you live in two different places, because you literally are not just thinking about gardening. You are gardening for 365 days a year. And I don't only just garden outside, I garden inside because I've had hydroponics also. And so it is just vegetables galore.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So I'm sure that we have a lot of folks in the chat who are specifically interested in how to garden 365. And maybe, you know, there's a few people in here who are saying, how could I possibly do that?
Well, that's true. So you have to look at where you live. There's a lot of places in the United States that you can literally grow all the time. You know, now you may have to, in the cooler seasons, you may have to use greenhouses or cold frames, things like that. But like when we just lived in Wyoming and we didn't go to Arizona, I did hydroponics. And so, in fact, my hydroponics is running right now if you hear some water. And I can grow tomatoes, peppers, Swiss chard, about anything you can grow in the garden, you can grow in hydroponics. And so that it just extends the fresh vegetables and food that you have. And so that is such a great thing as a homesteader to not have to go to the store. You know, you go to the store in the wintertime and those tomatoes, man, they are crappy.
Yeah, they are.
You know, because they pick them early. And I understand the whole idea, because Americans especially want fresh vegetables all year round. And so they have to figure out how to do that. Well, the way I figure it out is by doing hydroponics. And I have used lots of different systems, buckets. Sorry, Reagan's barking. Something's
Okay.
outside. And it just makes it so that we can really lower our food bills. We're getting nutritious vegetables, and we can have them all year round. Now, we go to Arizona now too. In fact, we leave next week. And my husband's already said, I suppose you're hitting the pavement running as soon as we get there. And I said, of course I am, because this is my vegetable gardening book. Now, you'd think this had information, but what it actually has is seeds. I've gone through my seeds storage, and it's just a photo album is what it is.
But I'm going to make you bigger.
Oh, okay. The seeds will just slide right in there. And so I go through my personal seed bank, and I decide, okay, what are the things I want to grow this year down in Arizona. Now, there are things that I'll, buy, plants that I'll buy. But for the most part, I like to do seeds because I have basically 6 months. And that's plenty of time to start things from seeds down there.
Wow.
And so it's just one more way that I supplement our food.
Exactly. And it's such an amazing thing when you actually get a harvest. Like, I know you do, but we've struggled with that the past few years. And to actually have a harvest this year was really awesome, to be able to put some stuff away.
Because as homesteaders, or even if you don't really even consider yourself a homesteader, but you love vegetables, and you have your garden outside, things happen. A hailstorm can come through, freezes can come through, early snows. So if you have options, if you have some hydroponics, and you have some outdoor plants, it just gives you more versatility. And if one thing goes wrong, you still have food coming in another source. And so all summer long, even though I had my gardens all growing outside, I still ran my hydroponics inside.
Absolutely. The hydroponics are such a good option to have indoors, whether, you're doing it all year long, in the summer as a backup, or even in the winter. It's just a great idea.
Yeah, and you don't have to buy the expensive hydroponics setup. There are so many videos and PDFs that you can download on making them out of 5-gallon buckets. There's lots of options. If you have a south-facing window, grow tomatoes in there all winter long. There's lots of options that don't cost people a lot of money. And sometimes I think people just think, oh no, I can't try this hydroponics because I don't have the funds to do that. But there are options that are really probably just things that you have around the house anyway.
Absolutely. I took my dog supplement containers, which was like, a white container with a screw top. And I took a soldering iron and made a net basket out of it. And then cut a hole in the top of I think it's a 3-pound coffee can. And then put the basket in the top, and it worked out perfectly. And
yeah,
so we've been saving coffee cans.
Yeah, I thought that was ingenious because all those little things add up. But if we just look, because I've seen people do them with yogurt containers and make those little baskets. There's options for us. And we live in precarious times. You watch things and you hear people and we might be short of this, we might be short of that. What can we do right now to make ourselves more sustainable? And all of us have to eat food. And so it's one of those things we have to really consider those things on what I can do for my family.
Absolutely. So, I couldn't agree more. And so I guess let's start there. So for indoor hydroponics, so I've done my hydroponics indoors, and my tomato experiment didn't go as great as I thought. It went really well because I was able to get tomato plants to mature, but I picked an indeterminate. And so I ended up taking them and putting them outside in the spring. And believe it or not, no matter how awful they look, they are still producing until the frost hit. What indoor not varieties or general plants would you say are the best? Like, say, dwarf versus, something else?
Well, it all depends on how you set your hydroponics up. Like my wall unit that's over on the side here. For my tomatoes, I use a miniature dwarf. It's like a cherry tomato. The plants are literally huge in there. They're only supposed to be about 6 inches tall. And this year, they're 12 inches, but they are just loaded with cherry tomatoes. And there are a lot of dwarf tomatoes that are full-size tomatoes, so that you don't have to have just cherries. Though cherries are a fun thing to just munch on.
Oh, I know they are. I grew sweetheart cherry tomato this year because someone had sent me seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And they were absolutely to die for in recipes. In fact, I have a crock pot going now with a whole jar full of them that I had preserved in olive oil. But yeah, Rochelle at Brampton Gardner actually grew dwarf chocolate tomatoes, which were a full-size tomato. So I was
Uh-huh.
thinking of trying something like that.
Yeah, and it really just depends on how much space you have. So if you're limited on your space that you can have your hydroponics, then go for the more miniature, the dwarfs, the determinants that aren't going to get that big. My peppers that are growing in my hydroponics are about 3 feet tall. I mean, they're way above. They're probably 2 feet above the hydroponics. And
Wow.
I put them on the second row because my hydroponics has rows, and I put the plants in there or the seeds in there. But they've loved the temperature, and the humidity must have been right because the water and the nutrients is the same as always. But sometimes you just have this fabulous time with hydroponics. And when you pull that out and you see the root system that is, your plant is actually capable of making, that really makes you think about in the garden, what do you have to do so that those roots can get big like that and produce like it can produce in the hydroponics. And so that's just adding, humus, compost, worm castings, things that you can add into your soil so that those roots can go through. And it's interesting with hydroponics that every single year I have to try something new. My daughter also has hydroponics. And like when she does her vining plants, cucumbers, squashes, watermelons, whatever she wants to grow in there, she literally hooks into the ceiling with strings coming down so that they can grab a hold and then work their way up. So there's a lot of options. Don't think that because you're growing inside and you're doing hydroponics that you can't basically grow whatever you feel like. You're limited to space, not to the variety that you can try.
That's interesting because I know that some of the hydroponics require larger pots depending on the root structure.
Mm-hmm.
Like my tomatoes, I grew them in the 5-gallon pails with a large net basket versus my mason jar, because the mason jar would have just, been full of roots. But that's really cool. So what is the wildest thing you've ever grown in the hydroponics?
Oh, probably just some flowers, because you don't
Really?
really think of growing flowers in hydroponics, but I have to try things. And so a lot of people will start their plants before they put it into their hydroponics. I just don't. I use what they call rock wool. It's green. So if you guys haven't seen that, it's actually spun rock.
Yep.
And it feels kind of crunchy, foamy, and it has a little hole in the center. And so you put the seed in there, and I just put it right into my net cup, into my hydroponics. Could I do it the other way? I could. But I just figure when those roots start growing, I want them always to have the same nutrients.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I do. But like I have tried to grow some loofahs in my hydroponics, and the plants grew really well, but I couldn't get them to flower. And so I might try a different variety and just see how that does, because sometimes it's just changing the variety and the hydroponics works. So, and it depends on, is it getting sunlight in there? Mine do not get sunlight. They just have the lights that go with my hydroponics. But there are people that have their hydroponics where the sunlight comes in their windows also. Those are options.
And I just grew loofah for the first time this year, and I started them and never thought that I would even get the fruit. Right. I wanted the sponges. That's why I wanted them.
Yeah.
And so I never even thought I would get the fruit. Now, I didn't get any viable sponges. I probably should have just ate them. But I tried to salvage them. It didn't work. But I'm still amazed at the fact that we actually got some, pretty decent sized loofahs for us. So next year I'm going to start them earlier. I think I started them in March, and I think I'm going to try and start them in January or February. They seem to be very slow. They were dirt. I put them in the dirt. They were not hydroponics, but I would have never thought to put them in hydroponics.
Yeah, it was just something, one of those things I wanted to try to see if it would work, you know. Like my peppers and my tomatoes, they have both a female and male parts in their flowers. And so all I have to do is, the best time to shake those plants are in the morning. So every morning I'll get up, I go to open that door, and I just shake those plants. And I hate that I'm going next week because I have harvested peppers and tomatoes, and they're still growing and they're still flowering. And it's like, I have to pull you out and let you die.
No. Can you plant them in temporary dirt to transport, or is this too hard with everything you got to move?
Well, we only have what we can fit in the back of the truck, you know, so space is one of those things. But the other thing about when it's been in hydroponics for a long time, it's very difficult to transfer it. You have to keep that soil just soggy as can be because it's so used to being so much liquid.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can't, you know, and sometimes I'll start plants in my hydroponics and then pull them out and then get them used to being in a pot and then plant them in my garden so that I'm just ahead of the game one more time.
Right.
But it is difficult if the root structure is very big, because like when I look at the root structure on those peppers, they literally go all the way down into the reservoir.
Wow.
And so they're going down 4.5, 5 feet. And so that's big root structure to try to transplant. But it makes me very sad. And I might take some cuttings and see if I can root some cuttings from both the tomatoes and the peppers, because then I have a head start on some of my tomatoes. Now, I always save tomato seeds because, one, I've grown tomatoes in my south window multiple times from cuttings from the garden. I've rooted them, planted them, and let them grow inside so that you can have tomatoes basically forever. You know, you just have to figure out the timing when you have to start to root them, to have them start to produce later on in the fall when your summer garden is done. And so part of that is doing cuttings. Part of that is saving seeds and knowing, you know, figuring out when I have to start those seeds. Like I save my tomato seeds. This is my box to take down to Arizona. I like to save them in these little jars.
Oh, nice.
You can order them online. They're cheap. You can get them at the dollar store. And so then I write things on there. Like these are my brother's orange tomatoes. No idea what they originally were. You know, they were just orange, but I don't have an actual name for them. So they're just called Jim's tomatoes.
Nice.
And then
you know exactly what they are.
I do. Terracotta tomatoes. They're brown tomatoes. They're huge and they're great tasting. And I have enough time. So I'll buy a few tomato plants when I get down there. And I'll start my tomato plants. And so I just have this continuous time of tomatoes. I'll root some of these off of my hydroponics. I could actually take some cuttings from my ones outside because we haven't had frost yet.
Oh, wow.
I know, shocking.
It's late this year. We've had 2, but believe it or not, my strawberries that are booming still have strawberries on them, and the strawberries plants have not been affected by the frost yet. Because usually once they get hit with one frost, I'll cover them up with straw. But they've been fine.
Yeah, ours too. And I think tonight is supposed to be 36 degrees. So, but if it stays windy like this, it'll frost. And so this afternoon I'll go and I'll pick up pick all the tomatoes that are left out there. And because I don't want to waste those, you put in time and energy and money. And so I want to be able, even if I end up giving them to neighbors or family, if I can't use them all, it's just economy of homesteading, really.
Yeah.
What can I have this abundance of tomatoes. What can I do so that if I stay in one place, like if I stayed in Wyoming, how can I have tomatoes all the rest of the year? Drying, canning, making soup, making V8, all those different things. Since I live in two places, I have actually cut down on how much produce I grow because I can only have so much stuff in a pantry. I tell people this lots of times. Joe and I could literally eat for years in our pantry with all the stuff that we've canned and stored and dried and, because you just don't know what life will bring you.
So true. So true.
And so we have to look at vegetable growing, fruit growing as a year-long process, not just as I garden for 3 months out of the year. Because what can you do those other months out of the year to still have fresh produce? Now, sometimes it's true. The only thing that a person can do is can it, freeze it, dehydrate it. It's not fresh, but it is nutrient for you, and it is good tasting and way better than buying stuff in the store. Plus, I find great satisfaction in growing my own vegetables. I find it a miracle that I can put a seed in that ground and pretty soon I have a 4-foot tall or 5-foot tall tomato that is bursting with nutrients. It's just amazing. And so I'm always looking at what I can do, and like when we start seeds, I just buy shop lights. I don't buy the expensive grow lights. I've found that, because the shop lights will have 2 bulbs in there. So I put a cool one and a warm one in there. And they last for years. And you raise it as the plants grow bigger. I put a fan on there so it has some air circulation. So because sometimes when you're growing from seed, you get that white kind of, it looks kind of like a mold on top of your soil. And that's from the moisture. But it's also from the air is not circulating enough. That is not anything bad. You can just scrape it with your finger. It's not going to hurt the plant at all. But it just shows you that you need air circulation. And you can set up a shelf or whatever, and you can start plants all year round so that you are always having something. So you don't have to have hydroponics. Do it in your window. Do it under a shop light. There's just a lot of options that you can do.
Absolutely. And I've used the fan trick to eliminate leggy seedlings. And it's worked like a charm. And what we have is it's over to my left. You can't see it. Excuse me. But we have one of those folding banquet tables. And so what Ryan did was he took one side of a pallet and the other side of a pallet, and he put them on the edges. And then we have the lighting going across.
Sure.
It's hanging from boards, and then we just stream it across. So it works out really perfect.
Right. And it's a great way to start your seedlings. But it's amazing how long those plants can grow in there. Before you either got to move them to a window or you're going to plant them outside. But there are plenty of people that grow under lights, for the entire life of the vegetable.
Yep.
And so you can grow 365 days a year. You can have fresh vegetables 365 days a year. All you have to do is a series of timing. How long does it take for that vegetable to start to produce? And like down in Arizona, there are things that I can plant in the ground, like Swiss chard in Yuma will grow for 5 years because
Wow.
it doesn't freeze there.
True.
And it basically starts, you know how you chop the edges off of the Swiss chard?
Yeah.
It gets almost trunk-like, and it keeps just sending things out, and you just keep trimming it. So all summer or all winter long, no, summer when we've been gone, our neighbors have picked Swiss chard because we have a water system, and my Swiss chard is in the flower bed. And
Wow.
so they can just keep chopping it and enjoying that. And so that is really one of those things that, you know, like my chickens love Swiss chard because we can only eat so much Swiss chard, and the rest are going to go to the chickens, friends and family, the compost. Um, it's just an abundant vegetable. And we love it chopped up and have it with some scrambled eggs.
Nice.
Put it in salad, put it in soups. So one of the other keys of 365 days a year is, what are you going to do with all those vegetables that you're growing?
Yep.
Because don't grow it if your family doesn't like to eat it. Now, you can be a little sneaky. You can say they don't like Swiss chard. You can grow it because it's a beautiful plant. You know, people will enjoy just looking at the plant. But then you dehydrate it, chop it all up, and add it to soups and casseroles. And so they're going to get that nutrient, and they're never going to know. It's Swiss chard.
I've taken kale and dehydrated it and made it powder.
Yeah.
And added it into things, and you don't even know it.
No, but it's got great stuff for you. And the idea of homesteading, for me anyway, is what can I do to provide for my family? What can I do to have nutritious food and fruits and vegetables? Can I raise animals? What can I do so that my footprint is not 1,000 miles away or 2,000 miles away coming to me? It's right in my backyard.
Amen. Amen. That's, you know, we are definitely increasing our ability to grow produce, and the greenhouse has really helped a lot with that. This is the first time I think I have just shy of 8 pounds of little tomatoes.
Awesome.
In my freezer, and I'm still getting tomatoes. So I'm going to wait until they're all done, and then I will do stuff. I've taken cherry tomatoes and put them in olive oil to preserve them because we do like it with the feta, that viral feta thing we love.
Right.
I have some in the crock pot now, and it's just been great, you know, and this is the first summer we've actually enjoyed the produce right in the moment because it was just so good. But on the other hand, meat is something that we can definitely put away, no problem, and raise and all that. So that's why I'm really excited for this today, because you raise a lot of good points. You want it to be local. You want it to be in your backyard, and your community is benefiting as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because, like you said, I mean, it sounds like your Swiss chard is growing like rhubarb almost.
Yeah.
And, you know, your neighbors in Arizona are able to just help themselves while you're not there. It's not going to waste.
Right. When we left, my artichokes, the plants themselves were 3 and 4 feet across, and they were sending up artichokes. And I told my neighbors, you just go over when they're ready and you just cut those off, because you can use the actual artichoke. You can actually eat the stem of an artichoke. And it's a beautiful plant. You know, if they didn't cut all of them off, it flowers, and it's a great pollinator flower. So that's a whole nother cycle, because like we have chickens, and we have some great friends that have, they must have 150, 200 chickens. And so they loan us 5 chickens because that's how many I can have in my backyard. And so all summer long, we had wonderful eggs. They were full grown chickens, so we didn't have to wait. And they'll come and pick them up next week. And when we come back, they'll give us 5 chickens again. I mean, they get the benefit that we feed them all summer long, but we get the benefit of the eggs. We have bees. And so that's something that when I'll actually harvest next week, some honey, and we will, you know, we have honey all the time. We give it to our friends or our family. We, you know, there's always an overabundance of honey. And,
That's awesome. That's awesome.
so
So
it's, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
It's just all those little things, those little boxes that you can check off and say, okay, I'm self-sufficient in this, in my vegetables. With chickens. Now, some people have chickens just for eggs, they have chickens for meat, or they have them for both. You have bees. Your garden grows better because of the pollinators. And you get the benefit of honey. So that's another check off. When I go to look at my garden on what I want to plant, I also want to look at plants that, like I like to grow a lot of squashes and pumpkins that are winter ones that will stay good all through the winter. When I go to grow my onions, I plant ones that store a really long time. My garlic will store a long time. So those are things I can add to my pantry. I can go down there and I can get a spaghetti squash or some kind of squash, and it can be snowing outside and I'm still using that produce from the garden.
Oh, and that feels so good.
It does. It's amazing. And if you think of, I'm a numbers girl. I like numbers. And so, I'll go through and I'll say, okay, I had total of 50 pounds of tomatoes, which is probably pretty low because I grow a lot of tomatoes. If I was buying that at the farmer's market or at the grocery store, how much would that cost me? So when I look at that, I can say that is money that I made, that we didn't take out of our homestead fund. And so it's another way to look at it, the benefits of gardening, especially if you can garden 365 days a year. It's not just nutritious. I'm literally saving money. I mean, there's work to do, but that's choices that I make, to have a garden and weed and water and that kind of thing. But I think it's a benefit.
Absolutely. And we were just talking about this on the 7F goal setting about, a couple of things you just reminded me of. Number one was, if you say I can't, it's almost like you're throwing your hands up in the air and you're not going to do anything because you're going to say, I can't. It's too expensive. I can't. I don't have the room. I can't. Whereas if you make choices or you get creative and say, like with the hydroponics, like you talked about earlier, I'm going to try to make my own system. I'm going to learn more about the nutrients. Like you'll surprise yourself and you'll actually go out of your way to try harder.
Right. And sometimes we think, oh, this item, like a hydroponic system, costs too much money. I can't afford that. But maybe what we should be looking at is, what can I do on my homestead, something extra that would pay for that hydroponics, and in the long run, save us money and have fresh vegetables 365 days a year. So sometimes we have to, it's easy for us to go, oh, that's just something I can't afford. I did extra sewing, to pay for that hydroponics because that was not a budget line, right? But it was something I wanted, and I thought this is something that would last me years and years and years, and I think this is the third or fourth year that we've had it now. No, maybe it's the third year. Mm-hmm. And we have grown so many vegetables in it. So there are options, but a lot of times you just have to start with what you have that doesn't cost you any money. In the meantime, what can I do if there's a specific item I actually think would work on our homestead?
Mm-hmm. And sometimes things like, and I don't want to throw a brand name out there, but there's a famous hydroponic garden that sits on your countertop. And it's wonderful. It's wonderful. But sometimes those things can be limiting, right? Because, the light adjusts so much, right? So you to get a plant, but sometimes then the plant is growing outside of that, so those are things to think about too when you're investing in something like that. I know last week we were talking on my live about the price of groceries, because we try to go grocery shopping like every 2 months or so, because we have to travel to do it. And we were shocked at the price because we don't buy any meat. And we're
Right.
pretty cheap. So we were sitting there so we were asking people what they, how much do you spend every month, and do you buy meat or not? And, how big is your family? And, apparently we're still pretty cheap, but we're still not buying meat. And I was still appalled. I couldn't believe the price of groceries. So it just makes sense to be growing stuff 365. And like you said, with all the nutrients and everything.
Yeah, because when you grow your own food, it's always more nutritious for you, and it tastes better. But I think you always have to look at the long-term effects of growing your own food, because some of the healthiest people have gardened for years. When they look at people in Japan, because there are people in Japan that statistically live longer than lots and lots of people in the world, right? Lots of them over 100 years old. They have certain things in common. Almost all of them garden, and then they have interaction with other people. So it's a balance that we need within ourselves to feed ourselves with people, that nurturing ourselves with just the communication and learning about people, and then the nutrients we get from our garden. And that combination in Japan has literally hundreds of thousands of people over the year, over 100 years old. It's amazing, what that long-term effect of gardening, even the touching of dirt with your hands, those microbes that are beneficial, that people didn't know that before. But now scientifically, they know that that's a benefit to you. So when your kids used to play in the mud, that was good for them.
Yeah, it is. And it's just like walking around barefoot,
Right.
it's good for you to be able to ground with the earth and stuff, And I think that, so I actually want to switch for a minute and just say, because I'm being mindful of time here, but what tips or suggestions would you give for somebody who's looking to grow year round, and maybe they're not in two places, so they're like in a cold climate like
Okay.
I am?
Okay. I think you have to look at first, what does your family like? What are the main staples that your family would really enjoy 365 days a year? Because you can't do hydroponics or use up window space and grow everything that you would grow in an actual garden. Most people do not have that kind of space. Okay, so what are plants that produce a lot of benefit? Like a tomato, you can get hundreds of pounds of fruit from one tomato. Now, we think of tomatoes basically as a 3-month plant. But if you're growing them inside, they will grow a lot longer. A pepper can grow 5, 6, 7 years. So it's not like you're going to get that 3 months. You can start that early in the spring, plant it in the ground or plant it in a pot and bring it inside. And you can grow it either in a south-facing window during the wintertime or under some lights. Even a west-facing, if you get a sun for 4 to 6 hours in your west-facing, it will grow for you.
Wow.
So think about, what can I do that those vegetables I can have for that long, all year round, until I'm doing it again. What varieties can I store all winter, so that I don't necessarily have to plant them again, but the produce will store long enough. Winter squashes, lots of pumpkins, onions, garlics, scallions. A lot of things like that will store a long time. What can I, I like to scour seed catalogs, I mean, there's certain catalogs that I always buy from, but I still get all those ones because you get so much information from there. And it'll tell you how many days it takes for that plant. Okay. So if you can't take cuttings to reroot, what can you start in, say, July? As if it's a new season, a fall garden. What of those things can I plant in a pot that I can bring inside so that I have those fresh vegetables? Zucchinis will grow for you and grow for you. If you can have them in pots and bring them inside, you're still going to get them. You'll have to hand pollinate them. Or tomatoes and peppers, you just shake them. And the pollen drops that 1/4 of an inch. But I vibrate my tomatoes outside. I use electric toothbrush and it drops that pollen and I have just tons of tomatoes. Wow. So you just have to really learn your vegetables. Almost everybody can grow lettuce on a counter. It doesn't take that much light. You can hook one of those short, they're not actually a shop light, but they're short, and you can put it under your counter. Yeah. Your lettuce will grow under there.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And so why not take advantage of all those things your family loves so that even in the wintertime, you can go over to that window or under those lights and you're picking tomatoes or peppers or lettuce or zucchini. Now, vining plants are a little harder, unless you have a larger hydroponics or you're doing hydroponics in 5-gallon buckets. But you just have to figure out, you can't sprawl them all over your living room floor, but you can put hooks up in the ceiling and let them climb themselves. Yep. And then you can just hand pollinate them with Q-tips, and so there's a lot of things, even in Wyoming when it is, and South Dakota when it is 40 below zero, that you can be growing plants inside,
Yeah, definitely. I know when I started with the bok choy last year, which was my first time outside of lettuce, I was amazed at the dark green color and how amazing those plants did. And I remember doing the video, we were looking outside and it was snow and it was cold and there they were inside happy as a clam because they're in this room, which is where our pellet stove is. And I do that strategically because it's nice and warm in here.
Right. Yeah, you have to think of the conditions that plant thrives in, and say you don't have a wood stove or a pellet stove like you and I do. What can you do? Do you need to close that one room off and have that warmer than any of the other places in your house so that the sunlight's coming in, the plants are warm, because you want to do what it takes to make that plant thrive so that you get the most vegetables out of that. Because that's the whole goal of doing that, is to reap the benefits, and then make sure that you're composting those plants, because it's a cycle. So like, I don't throw plants in the garbage can. If they were diseased, that's a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I like to chop and drop. I like to put in compost. If the chickens can eat them, the chickens are having them. You just have to, I can't even tell you how many times I've taken my phone. Can a chicken eat this?
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because for my new piglet owners, that is one thing I put in there along with a list of toxic stuff. And I do the same for my chickens. That's why I bring it up, is I wrote, get in the habit of Googling, can a chicken have this? Can a piglet have this? And so one of the things that we do is we leave the plants in the garden. And one of the things is the broccoli. The chickens love the broccoli plant. So while they're out foraging, I go out in the garden and I rip out a broccoli plant and I throw it in the yard and they eat it
Yeah.
down to nothing.
Yeah, I've done the same thing and it's good for them. Now, there are a couple of schools of thought when you have a garden. It's frozen. Should you clean out your whole garden or should you leave the plants there? Those are, there's pros and cons of both of them. I like to pile a lot of the stuff onto the soil so it doesn't blow away, but I don't yank the plant out. I like to cut it at ground level because there are microbes and insects that need those roots to eat during the wintertime. And so everything is a cycle. And if we can put ourselves into that natural cycle and reap the benefits of the vegetables, but then always give back into the soil, into our animals, birds, microbes, bees, we become in that cycle. And it is really a great benefit to be able to go into the garden and realize all those things that you are helping with, and then you're getting the benefits from that. And as a gardener that you want to garden all 365 days a year, don't be tempted to, you're trimming a plant. Oh, I'm just going to throw that in the garbage. I don't really want to have to go out in the snow. Have a bucket on your back porch if you don't want to go out into the snow and just throw that stuff in there until later.
Good point.
We can be lazy as a gardeners because it's cold and the wind is blowing and we may not want to have a compost. But if you have a bucket and it can freeze, it can thaw, and then you just thrown it out later, just, think about the whole cycle. I feel like Lion King. It's a whole cycle of life.
And I'm glad you brought that up because my former go-to was pull things out, but you are right because I did cut like my marigolds because I did read it was better to cut the plant at the ground level and then toss it because I did have some issues when it got cooler and got a little, wetter, that's when everything, the diseases started. And I was reading about, squash and stuff like that. And what did it have? That white, is it white?
Powdery mildew?
Yes. Powdery mildew. And I took a feed bag and I cut the leaves off and I threw it out. Thank you so much, Garden State Gardener. That's very generous of you. Thank you, Joe.
That was sweet of him. Yeah.
I know. Thank you, Joe. So yes, I think that's a good point. Are you open to taking some questions from folks if they have any?
Yeah, sure.
Excuse me. If anybody has any questions, Sandi is here to answer things for you. Hi, Tim Posey.
If I don't know, I'll tell you I don't know, okay?
That's totally me.
Because, I've been gardening, I gardened when I was a child even. And my grandmother especially was probably the biggest influencer of gardening with me. And she had a root cellar. She lived on a farm. And what she would do is people would give her baby food jars. And so she would save seeds in the baby food jars. And she had masking tape on there. And so they're in the cellar. And it'll say some kind of tomato. And then she'll say cool, wet summer or hot, dry summer. And so if the Farmers Almanac would say it's going to be a cool, wet summer, she would take those seeds and plant them. And that was just something that both me and my brother, we've talked about it through the years, that it was inspiring that she didn't have Google and she didn't have all these things, but she knew that seeds and plants react different with different weather. So why not take advantage of that? And so it's interesting what we learned through the years. And I've been a master gardener for, 15 years or so now. And it's a great program. If you think you know a lot about gardening, go through a master gardener program and you will be surprised at what you didn't know.
Yeah. And drive over the Tetons in the snow. In what month was that? September?
Yes, September.
I wanted to show you what somebody sent me. I wanted to ask you if you're obviously I know you know about the Farmers Almanac.
Yes.
I know everybody knows that. Doug at Appalachian American Homestead sent me Blum's Almanac.
I have seen that, but I don't see that in my stores. I can't buy that. I have to go online to buy that, but I have seen that before.
Well, I will tell you this. I told Doug the same thing because I looked back and forth, and he's in Tennessee. It's actually their channel is now Holman's Homestead, but him and his wife Carolyn sent this to me, and so it's going to be really cool to have 2 copies of 2 different almanacs and compare. But this has planting and weaning.
Awesome.
So, and he said his family goes by it. So I'm really curious to compare the 2 and see how it works,
Yeah, that's something I have been collecting Arizona books. In fact, I got 3 more of them today. On Amazon, you can go to the used books under, you look up a book, and then they always have used ones. And so that's what I always get. A lot of times you can't even tell that they're not brand new, but you paid a lot less money for them. So I've been collecting some Arizona books that have been coming in, but I will order that Blooms too, because I have seen that and I had forgotten about that publication, because I don't see that in my stores at all, so it's probably much more in the South. You can probably find it everywhere, but that's just, all of our, how we look at things, depends on where we live. Down in Tennessee, they probably grow 2 seasons. They probably do their spring and then their fall. And then it's only a few months in the wintertime that they're not growing. But even those guys can grow hydroponically or in a window. They just need that extra. They might have a greenhouse, cold frames, things like that. I mean, I've grown in cold frames in 30 below zero.
Really?
Yeah, I put at nighttime, it's a bamboo fencing. And so I roll that over the glass, and then I put blankets. And sometimes if I have extra bales of straw, I can set those on there on really cold nights. And then as soon as it warms up the next day, that's all coming off. And my cold frames are by my greenhouse, so that helps. It blocks the north wind. But there are a lot of things, because we all have microclimates. We all have things that we could go, oh, wow, I could grow this when I didn't think I could grow that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, like the Farmers Almanac, they've got when to plant and stuff like that. So, I really want to try to get more into this. It was ironic because how it came up was I mentioned that we had weaned the piglets, the first litter. And he said, now is a great time to wean. And I was like, I thought so too, because they were showing good signs. And he's like, no, according to Blum's. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So it was pretty cool to learn something new, We do have a question for you.
Okay.
And that is from Carmen at Jesus Loving Homesteader. Is there anything you would not recommend growing in hydroponics? And what was the biggest problem you faced?
I guess there isn't a plant that I wouldn't recommend. I think you should try them. Sometimes a plant might not work, but it could be just the variety, and you should try it again. I wouldn't give up on any vegetable in a hydroponics until I tried 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of that vegetable. The biggest problems that you can face with hydroponics, you always have to have good circulation in the hydroponics. Or you're going to, if you're doing small hydroponics, I know that people will change the water every week just because there's a lack of air in there. Probably I haven't had this, but sometimes people will get this white fly. And that can be a problem. And you sometimes have to pull everything out of your hydroponics and start again. Things can happen in hydroponics. It's not like it's a foolproof method. But a lot of with the hydroponics is just watching and looking at your hydroponics every single day.
Right.
That maybe some leaves on a plant are starting to do weird things. What is it? Is there an aphids in there? Is there something eating that? Is it getting powdery mildew? And the thing about hydroponics, you can just pull it out. If that plant starts to show signs of disease, I just pull them right out and I put something else in there because I don't want it to spread to any other plant that I have in my hydroponics. But luckily, I honestly haven't had, really problems. Sometimes you have a plant that doesn't want to grow very well, but then I just replace it.
Yeah. I have not dumped water every week, and I think that's because we are so dry, and I'm usually growing near the pellet stove in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm.
Had I been growing in my spare bedroom, right, which is on the opposite side of the house, and we're not running heat over there, I
Mm-hmm.
definitely could have an issue with it going stagnant because I know it's important to have that oxygen in the water. So I think that's been pretty cool. Carmen wants to know, what is your go-to fertilizer for the water?
Oh, I buy it's a fertilizer that's recommended for my iHarvest. I buy it from that company, and I just I put 2 tablespoons in when I refill up my tank, my reservoir. Um, with a hydroponics, when you watch people, you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want to, because some people, they're testing the water every day, they're doing all this stuff, and it's like, these are plants. These are just vegetables. And so I just do the recommended 2 tablespoons in my reservoir, which probably is, I don't know, 5, 8 gallons. And it has just worked fine. I never test anymore. When I first got it, I tested it like, because that's what everybody told me to do. And it was like, that's like ridiculous. I don't
Yeah.
test my soil every week.
You want to know the first thing I think of when I see folks testing water, and granted, that's great that they do it. I love that they love what they're doing, but for me, it just doesn't work. That's why me and Cracky Method get along so well, because it's set it and forget it is my life, right? But I keep it simple. But when I see people testing the water, I just think to myself, that's the same water you're pouring on your garden in the summertime, and you're not
Right,
testing it.
right.
So, I mean, if it's all right, I'd like to share. I use Aero Garden fertilizer in my
Uh-huh.
Cracky, and I've also used Kelzyme micronized
Awesome.
fertilizer, and I've also used I don't have the name of it, but Carmen, I can put it in the description when we're done, but it was specifically for tomatoes, and it had more calcium in it.
Mm.
So I've used that. What I like about the Kelzyme is that I can add that to nutrients and not have a chemistry experiment gone wrong. It's not like it's
Mm.
going to mix and I'm going to have an explosion. So that's been really cool. So that's the things I've done. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and if you're watching your hydroponics, if you're looking at your plants every day, because I shake my tomatoes and my peppers every day, you notice things. It's like when you're in the garden all the time, if you're walking through your garden every day, pulling a few weeds here and pulling a few weeds there, you start to notice things. And you've become aware of your plants. And when something becomes wrong, you see it right away because you've always paid attention to that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Charlie at Fallen Arkansas Veteran wants to know, how long can tomatoes last in the freezer?
Well, I think it depends on how you put them in the freezer. Like I like to vacuum seal my vegetables when they go into the freezer, and they will last a lot longer than if I just took like a Ziploc bag that's a freezer Ziploc bag. Um, I think a freezer Ziploc bag, I would say a few months, but when it's uh, I've sucked all the air out of that vacuum seal bag. Um, I think you could have it for a year or so
Mm-hmm.
because
Absolutely.
there's no air in between that. And when I go to, if I want to freeze whole tomatoes, what I first do is I just put the tomatoes on a cookie sheet and put them in the freezer so they become solid. Then they get vacuum sealed. Otherwise, the vacuum seal itself will smish them, you know, and you got juice all over the place, and then it's not sealing the way you want to. But if you have them frozen first, it works better. But otherwise, you got goo going all over the place.
No kidding. We did corn this year, and I don't have a commercial vacuum sealer where I can deal with the liquid. But we took corn on the cob, we blanched it, we cut it off the cob, we put it in bags, and Ryan went to vacuum seal it, and all the juice was coming up, and I turned around and I said, "You better put that in the freezer."
Yeah.
I said, "You better put that in the freezer for 24 hours and we'll vac seal it then." And it worked like a charm.
Right, because it's all frozen, and so that liquid is solid when you go to vacuum seal it. And then, like, some people want the skins off tomatoes before they freeze them. And so then you're going to dip them in hot water, you're dipping them in cold water, they come off, but then I'm still freezing them because otherwise you just have this mess inside your bag.
Yeah. And I'm freezing all my tomatoes so I can do something with them. I think what I'm going to end up doing is just do like a puree so I can use it for different uses. So I'm pretty excited. Well, apparently Garden State Gardener has us singing now. So we'll have to look for that after this episode.
He is so funny when he does that. He did my birthday and I'm singing happy birthday.
Well, I tell you, this has been so wonderful. Sandi, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, Lisa, I love you.
I love you too.
I was so excited that I could be on your Homesteading Academy. But if I could just say one thing to people, don't look at your garden as 3 months. Look at your garden as 365 days a year. And even if you're not actually getting fruit from something or vegetables from something, it's growing in your house, in your hydroponics, in a window, under lights. And it is a feeling like nothing else. I mean, a lot of people have houseplants and they take care of them. Why not have something that you can actually eat instead of a houseplant? I mean, I like houseplants. I have a 7-foot banana that's right here. But
one of the many, many reasons that I love about you is just do it, because I am a strong proponent of it. I know that we've talked about it. We grew 215 and a half pounds of meat on this 2-acre farm this year. And everybody's like, well, that's not a lot. That's a lot on 2 acres without a pig this year, without pork.
Huge.
Yeah. And that's all of our meat. And that doesn't include the gardens at all, because we were shocked and didn't weigh them. So it's, if you think about it, folks, yes, please listen to Sandi. I'm a strong proponent in saying never say never and figure it out. Because you can grow your own food, whether you're in an apartment, on a balcony, whether you are on a 40-acre farm, it doesn't matter. You can grow your own food and you can grow what you want. That is what is so important. So please take that advice.
Yeah. And anybody that's a new homesteader or has been homesteading and they want to expand, take advantage of all the things around you. Take advantage of your extension office, of your library, of YouTube videos. Look at Lisa's, look at mine, look at other homesteading channels. And you can learn a lot of things that you're not making the same mistake, because that's why people have YouTube channels is to help and educate and learn, because all of us are going to have things that don't work. That the seasons are different each year. Something that grew so well last year isn't growing well this year, but then the next year it probably will. So don't give up. Just get as much information. And if it's a failure, it doesn't matter. Just do it again.
Do everything you can to make it happen. If I didn't, we wouldn't have had the garden we had this year if I would have thrown my hands up in the air the first year. This is our 3rd year here. So we finally got something and now we know what to grow, and we're just going to stick to the basics because that's what works, So,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And the difference that you had in having a greenhouse this time and how your vegetables were just growing so well. You just got to look and see what you can do to make it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, everybody, Sandi, thank you so very much for being here. Everybody in the chat, thank you for being here. If you're catching us on replay, thank you for watching this series. And one thing I do want to throw out there again is, speaking of limited spaces and small breeds, I just want to throw out there, if anybody is interested in me doing an episode on kune pigs, it would be the basics of raising them for breeding. As meat, I am not an expert on yet to talk about. I'm starting that this year, but I do know how to raise meat pigs. But if you want to know more about kune pigs and how to care for them, let me know in the comments down below, and I will get that series going. But for now, thanks for being here, and have a great day, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Take care.